The gunshot that shattered the parlor window wasn't meant for Rose Ferguson, but the blood spatter on her yellow dress told everyone in St. Louis that she'd been standing too close to the man who just died at her feet. Rose didn't scream. She'd learned years ago that screaming only made things worse, only drew more attention to herself in a world where attention could get a woman killed. Instead, she gathered her skirts, stepped over the cooling body of Marcus Thornley, the gambling hall owner who'd employed her as a singer, and walked straight out the back door into the humid Missouri night. Behind her, chaos erupted. Shouts. More gunfire. The sound of furniture breaking as men scrambled for cover, or fought over whatever dispute had started this mess. She had nothing but the clothes on her back, $17 sewn into the hem of her petticoat, and the knowledge that staying in St. Louis meant answering questions she couldn't afford to answer. The authorities would want to know about her connection to Thornley, about the ledgers she'd accidentally seen, about the names she'd overheard whispered in dark corners. Worse, the men who'd killed Thornley would want to ensure she hadn't seen too much, hadn't heard too much, hadn't existed too much. Rose Ferguson had spent her 23 years learning one essential truth. Sometimes the only way to survive was to disappear. By dawn, she was on a westbound train using the name Ruth Franklin, having purchased her ticket with trembling hands from a clerk who'd been too busy to notice the dark stains on her hem. She'd scrubbed the blood from her face and hands in a public washroom, twisted her auburn hair into a severe bun, and adopted the posture of a respectable widow traveling to meet family. The lie came easily. She'd been lying about who she was for so long that the truth felt like something that belonged to a different woman entirely. The train carried her away from the Mississippi River, away from the city's smoke and noise, through prairie land that stretched endless and golden under the June sun of 1882. She watched it all through the window, this vast country she'd only ever heard about in songs and stories. Each mile that clicked past beneath the wheels felt like a small freedom, though she knew better than to believe she was truly safe. Safety was an illusion, a trick the world played on women like her before snatching it away again. At a depot in Kansas, she overheard two men discussing Texas, discussing cattle, discussing the money to be made and the land to be claimed. One mentioned Bandera County, said it was rough country that could break a man or make him, depending on what he was made of. Rose filed the information away, her mind already calculating. Texas was far enough. Texas was different enough. In Texas, she could become someone new. She changed trains twice more, spending her precious dollars carefully, eating only when hunger made her hands shake. By the time she reached San Antonio in mid-June, she had $8 left and a bone-deep exhaustion that made her stumble on the platform. The heat was different here, drier than Missouri's suffocating humidity, and the sun seemed larger, more aggressive in its brightness. Bandera lay another 50 miles northwest, accessible only by stagecoach or horse. Rose spent 2 of her remaining dollars on the stage fare and climbed aboard with 3 men who eyed her with varying degrees of curiosity and suspicion. She kept her gaze fixed on the landscape outside, watching as rolling hills replaced the flatter terrain, as cypress trees and oaks created pockets of shadow along the winding road. The town of Bandera sprawled along the Medina River, smaller than she'd hoped but busy enough that a woman alone might not draw immediate attention. The main street was wide and dusty, lined with wooden buildings that looked sun-bleached and weathered. Horses stood tied to hitching posts, their tails flicking at flies. A few women in bonnets hurried along the wooden sidewalks, their faces showing the wear of frontier life. Rose climbed down from the stage with her back straight and her expression neutral. Though inside, she was calculating her next move with the desperation of someone running out of options. $6 wouldn't last long anywhere, let alone in a town where she knew no one and had no prospects for employment. The stage driver, a grizzled man with kind eyes beneath his weathered hat, seemed to sense her uncertainty. "You got family here, miss?" "I'm meeting someone," Rose lied smoothly. "A cousin. I'm sure she'll be along shortly." He nodded but didn't look convinced. "Hotel's that way if you need a place to wait. General store's across the street. We got a decent town here, but it's rough in parts. A lady oughtn't to wander after dark. Thank you for the advice." Rose watched him drive away, then turned to survey her new surroundings with a sinking feeling in her chest. She needed work, needed it desperately, but respectable employment for single women was scarce in frontier towns. She could sew, could sing, could keep ledgers and manage accounts. She could also pour drinks, deal cards, and smile at men who thought money bought more than liquor. But those skills would only trap her in the same life she'd just fled. The hotel proved too expensive at 75 cents a night. The rooming house wanted references she couldn't provide. By late afternoon, with the sun beating down mercilessly and her stomach cramping with hunger, Rose found herself sitting on a bench outside the general store, trying not to let panic show on her face. "You look like you could use a meal." The voice belonged to a woman perhaps a decade older than Rose, with silver threading through her dark hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She wore a simple calico dress and an apron dusted with flour. "I'm fine, thank you," Rose said automatically. "Uh-huh, and I'm the Queen of England." The woman sat down beside her without invitation. "I'm Margaret Prout. My husband and I run the cafe down the street. I've been watching you for the past hour, trying to decide if you're in trouble or running from it." Rose's throat tightened. "I'm just passing through." "With what luggage?" "Wearing a dress that's been slept in and has stains you tried real hard to wash out." Margaret's voice wasn't unkind, just direct. "Look, honey, I've seen enough women come through here with that look in their eyes. I'm not asking you to spill your whole story. I'm just offering you a meal and maybe some information about work if you're looking." The kindness, unexpected and unearned, nearly broke something in Rose. She blinked hard against the sudden heat in her eyes. "I can pay. Didn't ask you to, come on." The cafe was small but clean, with 6 tables covered in checkered cloths and the smell of something savory making Rose's mouth water. Margaret settled her at a corner table and returned with a plate of beef stew, fresh bread, and coffee so strong it could strip paint. Rose ate slowly, trying to maintain dignity despite her hunger. Margaret sat across from her, not eating but watching with that same assessing gaze. "There's not much work in town for a single woman," Margaret said finally. "Not respectable work, anyway. We've got the saloons, but I'm guessing that's not what you're after." "No." Rose's voice was firm, thought not. "You don't have that hardness yet." Margaret paused. "There are ranches in the area that sometimes need help, cooking, cleaning, washing. Most of them employ men exclusively, but a few of the bigger outfits might take on a woman for domestic work. The Navarro place, maybe, though old man Navarro is particular about who he hires." Rose latched onto this information like a lifeline. "How would I inquire about such positions?" "You'd have to ride out to the ranches yourself, most likely. It's not the kind of thing they post notices for in town." Margaret tilted her head. "You can ride, can't you? I can learn." Something that might have been respect flickered in Margaret's eyes. "Tell you what. There's a rancher comes into town every few weeks for supplies. Ethan Norwood. He's got a decent-sized spread about 10 miles north of here, runs cattle. Lost his housekeeper about a month back when she moved to Austin to live with her daughter. I heard him mention he was looking for help, but that was a few weeks ago. Might have found someone by now. How would I reach him? He'll probably be in town tomorrow or the day after. Usually comes in on Thursdays. That's tomorrow. Margaret stood up. You need a place to stay tonight. And don't tell me you've got one, because I can see you don't. We've got a room above the cafe. Nothing fancy, but it's clean and it's free if you're willing to help me with breakfast service in the morning. Rose's pride warred with her desperation, and desperation won as it always did. That's very generous. It's practical. I could use the help, and you look like you're not afraid of work. Margaret's expression softened slightly. Whatever you're running from, it's not my business. But Bandera's a good town for starting over if you're serious about it. We look after our own here. The room above the cafe was indeed small, barely large enough for a narrow bed, a washstand, and a hook on the wall for hanging clothes. But it was clean and private, and when Rose finally lay down that night, she felt the first small loosening of the knot that had been tight in her chest since she'd fled St. Louis. She wasn't safe yet, might never be truly safe. But she was farther from her past than she'd been yesterday, and that had to count for something. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams of gunshots and blood, of Marcus Thornley's surprised expression as he'd fallen, of men with guns searching for her through dark streets. She woke before dawn, disoriented until memory returned with its familiar weight. Margaret was already in the kitchen, and Rose threw herself into helping with a focus that kept thoughts at bay. She learned the rhythm of the cafe quickly. Coffee first, always hot and always ready, then eggs and bacon and biscuits for the early morning customers who came in smelling of horses and hard work. The men who filed through were mostly polite, nodding to Margaret and eyeing Rose with curiosity but not hostility. She kept her head down, her movements efficient, her expression neutral. By mid-morning, when the breakfast rush had ended, she'd proven herself useful enough that Margaret pressed $1 into her hand despite her protests. You earned it, and you're a natural at this work. Margaret surveyed the clean tables with satisfaction. If this rancher doesn't work out, you've got a job here if you want it. Won't make you rich, but it'll keep you fed and housed. The offer was a safety net Rose hadn't expected, and she clutched it gratefully in her mind. But when the cafe door opened just before noon, and a tall man walked in, she knew without being told that this was Ethan Norwood. He was perhaps 30 years old, though the sun and weather made it hard to judge. Tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and brown eyes that swept the cafe with the alertness of someone accustomed to assessing his surroundings. He wore work clothes, faded denim and a dusty shirt, boots that had seen better days. His hat was wide-brimmed and sweat-stained, and when he pulled it off, he nodded to Margaret with obvious familiarity. "Morning, Margaret. Coffee and whatever you've got that's quick. I've got to get supplies and head back before dark." "Sit down, Ethan. I'll bring you something." Margaret glanced at Rose, a question in her eyes. Rose's heart hammered against her ribs. This was her chance, possibly her only one. She wiped her hands on her apron and approached his table before courage could desert her. "Mr. Norwood." He looked up, and she felt the full weight of his attention. His eyes were intelligent and direct, the kind of gaze that probably saw more than people wanted to reveal. "Yes, my name is Ruth Franklin." The false name came smoothly, and she'd told it so many times now it almost felt real. "I'm new to Bandera and looking for employment. I heard you might need a housekeeper." Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. "Where'd you hear that?" Margaret mentioned it. "I apologize if the position has already been filled." "It hasn't." He paused. "What's your situation, Miss Franklin? You have family in the area?" "No, sir. I'm on my own." Rose met his gaze steadily, willing herself not to show the fear beneath her calm exterior. "I'm a hard worker. I can cook and clean, manage a household, do basic mending and washing. I'm reliable and discreet, and I'm not afraid of isolation or hard work." "Where are you from?" The question she'd been dreading. "Missouri originally. I've been traveling." "Why Bandera?" "I heard it was a place where people could start fresh." Not quite a lie. Something shifted in Ethan's expression, a softening around his eyes that suggested he understood more than she'd said. "It can be that, if a person's running towards something instead of just away from something." The distinction hit Rose harder than she'd expected. She'd been running away for so long, she'd almost forgotten what it meant to run toward anything. Margaret arrived with coffee and a plate of food, and the interruption gave Rose a moment to gather herself. Ethan thanked her and took a long drink of coffee, still watching Rose over the rim of the cup. "It's isolated out there," he said finally. 10 miles from town, and my nearest neighbor is 5 miles past that. I've got ranch hands, but they bunk in a separate building and keep to themselves mostly. The work's constant. I need someone who can keep the main house running, prepare meals, maintain supplies. It's not glamorous." "I'm not looking for glamorous. I'm looking for honest work." Ethan nodded slowly, as if coming to some internal decision. "I can pay $25 a month plus room and board. You'd have your own quarters in the main house, separate entrance. I run a respectable operation, Miss Franklin. I don't tolerate drinking or gambling, and I expect a day's work for a day's pay. But I'm fair, and I don't ask questions about a person's past if they do their job and stay out of trouble." $25 was more than Rose had dared hope for. Combined with room and board, it represented the closest thing to security she'd had in years. But she forced herself to ask the question that needed asking. "Would I be safe there?" Ethan's expression turned serious. "Yes, madam. You have my word on that. Any man on my ranch who disrespects a woman answers to me, and I don't give second chances on that account." There was a weight to his words that made Rose believe him. She'd learned to read men out of necessity, to sense the difference between those who meant what they said and those who told pretty lies. Ethan Norwood struck her as someone who dealt in plain truth, who said exactly what he meant and backed it up with action. "Then I accept your offer, Mr. Norwood. Ethan. If you're going to be working for me, might as well use my given name." He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Rose shook it. His grip was firm but not crushing, his palm calloused from work. "Can you be ready to leave in a couple hours? I need to finish up in town, but I'd like to get back before dark." "I can be ready." Margaret, who'd been hovering nearby and absolutely eavesdropping, grinned broadly. "Good. Ethan, you take care of her. Rose, you come get your things." Rose winced internally at the slip but recovered quickly. "Ruth," she corrected gently. "Right, Ruth. Sorry." Margaret didn't look particularly sorry, but she didn't press the issue. 2 hours later, Rose stood in the back of the general store while Ethan loaded supplies onto a wagon. She'd helped carry sacks of flour and sugar, crates of canned goods, coils of rope, and bags of feed. The work felt good, purposeful. Margaret had given her a bundle containing a spare dress, some undergarments, and a shawl, pressing them into Rose's hands despite her protests about charity. "It's not charity, it's practicality," Margaret had said firmly. "You can't work in one dress. Consider it an advance on all the meals you're going to buy from me when you come to town." Now, climbing up onto the wagon seat beside Ethan, Rose felt the strange sensation of stepping into a new life. The wagon lurched forward, and Bandera began to recede behind them, swallowed by dust and distance. They rode in silence for the first mile, the only sounds the creak of the wagon wheels, the steady clip of the horses' hooves, and the occasional call of a bird. The landscape rolled past in shades of green and gold, dotted with live oaks and the occasional cypress. Hills rose in the distance, hazy in the afternoon heat. "You don't have to tell me your story," Ethan said finally, his eyes on the road ahead. "But I'm going to tell you mine, so you know who you're working for." Rose turned to look at him, surprised. "I came to Texas 7 years ago from Tennessee. My father died in the war and my mother passed from fever when I was 19. I had nothing keeping me back east, so I headed west like a lot of young fools do, thinking I'd make my fortune." His mouth quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Spent 2 years working other men's ranches, learning the cattle business, saving every penny. Bought my land 5 years ago when it was nothing but scrub and hope, built it up from there." "You did well for yourself," Rose said quietly. "I worked hard and got lucky, but I remember what it's like to be alone in the world, to need a chance that nobody seemed willing to give." He glanced at her then, and his eyes were kind. "So I don't judge people for their past, Ruth. I judge them for what they do in the present. You do your work, keep your word, and we'll get along fine." The knot in Rose's chest loosened another fraction. "Thank you. That's more than fair. Fair's all I aim for. And you should know that my ranch, the hands I employ, we're not saints. But we're good people trying to make an honest living. You'll be respected there and you'll be safe. That's not a promise I make lightly." They fell into silence again, but it was more comfortable now, less weighted with uncertainty. Rose watched the landscape change as they climbed into higher country, the vegetation becoming more varied, the air slightly cooler. She spotted cattle in the distance, their red and brown hides dotting the grassland like scattered coins. "How many head do you run?" she asked, more to break the silence than from genuine curiosity, though she found she was curious about this man and his life. "About 500 right now. I'm trying to build up to 1,000 over the next few years. It's good country for cattle, plenty of grass and water." Pride colored his voice. "It's hard work, and some years the weather or the market can break you, but I can't imagine doing anything else now." "You don't have family to help you run things?" "No, madam. Never married. Came close once, but she decided ranch life wasn't for her." He said it matter-of-factly without apparent bitterness. "Couldn't blame her. It takes a certain kind of person to thrive out here." Rose thought about that, about what kind of person could thrive in isolation and hard work. She'd spent so much of her life in cities, surrounded by noise and crowds, that she'd forgotten what silence sounded like. But as the wagon rolled on and the vast Texas sky stretched overhead, she felt something unexpected stirring in her chest. Not peace, not yet, but maybe the possibility of it. The Norwood ranch revealed itself gradually as they crested a rise. The main house was built of stone and timber, solid and practical rather than fancy. It was larger than Rose had expected, with a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides and windows that would let in plenty of light. Behind it stood a barn, a smaller bunkhouse, several outbuildings, and a network of corrals. Trees had been planted around the house, providing shade, and she could hear the sound of running water from somewhere nearby. "Creek runs through the property," Ethan said, following her gaze. "Never goes dry, even in bad years. It's one of the reasons I bought this land." He pulled the wagon up near the house and jumped down, then came around to help her descend. Rose accepted his hand, noting again the calluses and the strength in his grip. She stood looking at the house, at this place that would be her home for however long this arrangement lasted, and felt a wave of something she refused to name as hope. "Let me show you around," Ethan said. The inside of the house was surprisingly well kept for a bachelor establishment. The main room served as both parlor and dining area, with a stone fireplace at one end and a large table that could seat 8. The furniture was simple but sturdy, and everything was clean if not particularly organized. A kitchen opened off to one side, spacious and well-equipped with a cast-iron stove, a deep sink with a hand pump, and plenty of shelving. "I've been doing my own cooking since my last housekeeper left," Ethan explained, looking slightly embarrassed. "It's edible but not what you'd call good." Rose walked through the rooms, her mind already cataloging what needed to be done. The place needed a woman's touch, needed organizing and deep cleaning, and the kind of systematic attention that a man working from dawn to dusk couldn't provide. But it was sound and solid, and she could make it better. "Your quarters are through here," Ethan said, leading her to a door off the kitchen. The rooms were small but private, consisting of a bedroom and a tiny sitting area. A bed, a dresser, a washstand, a chair by a window that looked out toward the hills. It was more than she'd dared hope for, more privacy and safety than she'd had in years. "The pump in the kitchen draws from the creek, so there's always water," Ethan continued. "There's a bathing room off the kitchen with a tub. I usually heat water on the stove. Outhouse is behind the main house. We get supplies every few weeks when I go to town, but we keep a good stock of staples on hand." Rose nodded, taking it all in. "When do you want me to start?" "You already are, I suppose. It's late afternoon now, so maybe just settle yourself today, look around, get your bearings. Tomorrow you can start with breakfast for me and the hands. We eat early around dawn. Dinner's at midday when we come in from the morning work, and supper's at dusk. The hands usually make their own breakfast, but they appreciate a good dinner and supper." "How many hands?" "6 right now. They're good men, all of them. I'll introduce you tomorrow." Ethan left her to settle in, and Rose stood in the center of her small room feeling disoriented by the sudden stillness. She could hear him moving around in the kitchen, the sound of boots on wooden floors, the clank of pots. Outside, someone was hammering something in the distance, and cattle lowed in their far-off way. She unpacked the few items Margaret had given her, hanging the extra dress on a hook, folding the underthings into the dresser drawer. It took less than 5 minutes to arrange her entire worldly possessions, and the emptiness of it struck her anew. She'd left St. Louis with nothing but blood on her dress and fear in her heart, and here she was in Texas, in a strange house with a man she'd just met, starting over with a false name and a hollow place where her past should be. But she was alive. She was employed. She had a locked door and a bed and the promise of honest work. It was more than many women had, more than she'd had the right to expect. She would make it enough. That evening, Ethan knocked on her door and invited her to join him for supper. He'd made beans and bacon, served with bread that was only slightly burnt around the edges. They ate in the main room, the silence between them still slightly awkward but not uncomfortable. "You'll want to know the routine," Ethan said, pushing his plate aside. "I'm usually up before dawn. I make my own coffee, so don't worry about that. Breakfast can be simple during the week, something that sticks to the ribs. Eggs, bacon, biscuits if you've got time. The hands work hard, so they eat a lot. Dinner should be the biggest meal, plenty of meat if we've got it, vegetables from the garden when they are in season. There's a root cellar out back that we keep stocked." Rose listened carefully, committing everything to memory. "What about laundry?" "I've been taking my things to town, but if you're willing to handle it here, that'd be a help. There's a washboard and tubs in one of the outbuildings." He paused. "I know it's a lot of work. If it's too much, you tell me and we'll figure something out. I can handle it." Ethan studied her for a moment, and she had the unsettling feeling that he saw past her careful composure to the desperation underneath. But all he said was, "I believe you can." That night, Rose lay in her narrow bed, and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling into darkness. Somewhere an owl called. The wind moved through the trees with a sound like water. The house creaked and sighed around her, old wood adjusting to the cooling air. She'd grown accustomed to city sounds, to the rattle of carriages and the shouts of drunks and the endless human noise that marked urban life. This silence was different, vast and deep, and it took her a long time to fall asleep within it. She woke before dawn to the sound of Ethan moving around in the kitchen, and for a confused moment couldn't remember where she was. Then memory returned, and with it purpose. She dressed quickly in her old dress, pinned her hair up, and emerged to find Ethan pouring coffee by lamplight. "Morning," he said, looking surprised. "You didn't have to get up this early today. I might as well learn the routine." Rose surveyed the kitchen, already planning. "If you'll show me where everything is, I can start breakfast." Over the next hour, as dawn slowly lightened the sky outside, Rose learned the layout of Ethan's kitchen. She found flour and lard for biscuits, eggs from the henhouse Ethan showed her out back, bacon hanging in the smokehouse. She worked quickly and efficiently, falling into a rhythm that felt natural despite the unfamiliar surroundings. When the hands started arriving for breakfast, drawn by the smell of food and fresh coffee, Rose had the table laden with biscuits, bacon, eggs, and gravy. 6 men filed in, ranging in age from barely 20 to nearly 50, all of them stopping short at the sight of her. Ethan made the introductions. "This is Ruth Franklin, the new housekeeper. You'll treat her with respect or find employment elsewhere. Understood?" A chorus of "yes, sir," and "madam" followed, and Rose relaxed slightly. The men were polite if curious, and they fell on the food with the enthusiasm of people who'd been eating their own cooking or Ethan's attempts for too long. "This is real good, madam," one of them said, a young man with red hair and freckles. "Best biscuits I've had in months." "Thank you," Rose said quietly. Over the following days, she fell into the routine of ranch life with a determination that surprised her. She rose before dawn, prepared breakfast, cleaned the house, did laundry, tended the garden, prepared dinner and supper. The work was constant and physically demanding, but it was also straightforward in a way her old life had never been. No one asked her to smile at men she despised, to sing songs that made her skin crawl, to pretend enthusiasm for things that hollowed her out inside. Ethan proved to be a fair employer and, she was discovering, a good man. He thanked her for every meal, noticed when she did extra work, and treated her with a respect she wasn't accustomed to receiving. He didn't hover or question her methods, but he was quick to help when she needed something heavy moved or when a repair required strength she didn't have. In the evenings, after the hands had returned to their bunkhouse and the ranch had settled into its nightly quiet, Ethan often sat on the porch with coffee, and Rose found herself joining him there when her work was done. They didn't talk much at first, just sat in companionable silence watching the stars emerge in the vast Texas sky. But gradually, tentatively, they began to share pieces of themselves. Ethan told her about building the ranch, about the hard early years when he'd wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake, about the satisfaction of seeing his herd grow, of knowing he'd built something lasting with his own hands. Rose, in turn, carefully edited stories about growing up in Missouri, about loving music, about the small pleasures that had sustained her through difficult times. She never lied outright, but she left vast spaces in her narrative, gaps that Ethan never pressed her to fill. 2 weeks into her employment, Rose was in the garden picking vegetables when she heard horses approaching fast. She looked up to see 3 men riding in, dust trailing behind them, and something about their posture, their speed, made her heart jump into her throat. She stood frozen, half hidden behind the bean plants as they reined up in front of the house. Ethan emerged from the barn, and even from a distance, Rose could see his body language shift into something wary and alert. "Help you, gentlemen." The lead rider was a big man with a weathered face and a star pinned to his vest. "I'm Sheriff Coleman from Medina County. We're looking for a woman, might have come through this area a few weeks back. Auburn hair, mid-20s, might be using a different name." Rose's blood turned to ice. They'd found her. Somehow they'd tracked her here. Her mind raced, calculating distances, escape routes, knowing even as she did that it was hopeless. She had nowhere left to run, what she wanted for. Ethan's voice was calm, giving nothing away. "Witness to a killing in St. Louis. Man named Marcus Thornley, shot dead in his own establishment. We think this woman saw who did it, maybe even knows why. There's people back east who want to ask her some questions." "She wanted by the law," the sheriff shifted in his saddle. "Not exactly wanted, no. But there's interested parties who'd like to locate her." Interested parties. Ethan's tone made it clear what he thought of that phrase. "So she's not a criminal. She's not wanted for any crime, but you're tracking her across state lines on behalf of interested parties." "Now look here, Norwood." "No, you look here, Sheriff. If this woman's not wanted for a crime, then she's got every right to her privacy and her safety. And I don't take kindly to men showing up on my property trying to hunt down someone on behalf of interested parties who don't even have the law on their side." Rose realized she was holding her breath, her hands clutching the vegetables so tightly they were leaving marks. Ethan was defending her, defending someone he barely knew, risking whatever consequences that might bring. The sheriff's expression hardened. "You seen anyone matching that description or not?" "Can't say that I have. But even if I had, I wouldn't turn over a woman to men who admit they've got no legal claim on her." Ethan crossed his arms. "Is there anything else I can help you with, Sheriff?" The standoff lasted another long moment before the sheriff jerked his reins. "If you hear anything, you let me know. Those interested parties have deep pockets, if you understand my meaning." "I understand perfectly. Good day, Sheriff." Rose watched the men ride away, her heart hammering so hard she felt dizzy. She waited until they were out of sight before stepping out from behind the garden plants on legs that shook. Ethan turned and saw her, and his expression shifted from hard to concerned in an instant. "You heard all that. It wasn't a question." Rose nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Ethan walked over to her, his movements deliberate and calm. "Ruth, or whatever your real name is, you need to tell me what happened. Not because I'm going to turn you in, but because I can't protect you if I don't know what we're dealing with." "Rose," she whispered. "My real name is Rose Ferguson." They sat on the porch, and Rose told him everything. About working at the gambling hall because it was the only job she could get after her parents died and left her with nothing. About Marcus Thornley, who'd been involved in things darker than simple gambling. About the night someone had finally come to collect on whatever debts or betrayals had been building. About the blood and the chaos and her desperate flight. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said, her voice shaking. "I was just there, but I saw faces, heard names. I know things that could get powerful men in trouble, and they want to make sure I don't talk. So they killed Marcus, and now they're looking for me." Ethan listened without interrupting, his expression serious. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Why didn't they just kill you two that night?" "I don't think they meant to let me live. I think they didn't realize I was there until I was already gone." Rose wrapped her arms around herself. "I've been running for weeks. I thought maybe I'd gotten far enough, changed my name enough that they wouldn't find me. But they did. The sheriff said you're not wanted for any crime. I'm not. But the people looking for me don't need the law to make me disappear. Ethan stood and paced to the edge of the porch, staring out at his land. Those men who were just here, they'll go back to town, ask questions. Margaret probably mentioned you. They'll put it together. I know. Rose felt the tears she'd been holding back for weeks finally start to fall. I'll leave tonight. I won't bring trouble to your door. You've been kinder to me than you had any reason to be, and I won't repay that by putting you in danger. Stop talking nonsense. Ethan turned back to face her, and there was steel in his voice. You're not going anywhere. Those men want to hurt you, and I won't let that happen. You can't stop them. You don't owe me anything. Maybe not. But I don't turn away people who need help, and I sure as hell don't hand women over to men who want to silence them. He came back to sit beside her, and his expression gentled. Rose, you've worked hard these past 2 weeks. You've been honest in your work even when you couldn't be honest about your past. That tells me what kind of person you are, and that person deserves protection. Why? The question burst out of her. Why would you risk yourself for me? Ethan was quiet for a moment, his eyes searching her face. Because I know what it's like to need a second chance. Because this ranch, this life, it's built on the idea that a person's future matters more than their past. And because... He paused, seeming to struggle with words. Because in 2 weeks, you've made this place feel like a home instead of just a house. Because when I come in from working all day, there's hot food and clean clothes and someone who sees the work I do and appreciates it. Because you're smart and capable and you don't deserve to spend your life running from things you didn't do. The tears were falling freely now, and Rose didn't try to stop them. They'll come back. When the sheriff figures out I'm here, they'll come back with more men. Then we'll be ready. Ethan's jaw was set in a way that suggested he'd made up his mind and wouldn't be swayed. I've got 6 hands who are loyal to me, and not one of them would stand by while someone hurt a woman under my protection. This is Texas, Rose. We've got laws about this kind of thing, and we've got ways of handling men who think money puts them above those laws. I don't want anyone to get hurt because of me. Then stay close to the house for now. Let me and the boys handle this. He reached over and, after a moment's hesitation, took her hand. His palm was warm and solid against hers. I promise you, Rose Ferguson, you're safe here. I won't let anyone take you away from this place unless that's what you want. Rose looked at their joined hands, at this man who was offering her protection she hadn't earned, safety she didn't deserve. I don't understand why you're doing this. Neither do I entirely, Ethan admitted, but I know it's the right thing, and maybe. He trailed off, then seemed to gather his courage. Maybe it's because in 2 short weeks I've come to care about what happens to you, more than an employer should care about an employee. The admission hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility and danger. Rose knew she should pull her hand away, should maintain the distance that her circumstances required. But she didn't want to. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she wanted to lean into something instead of running away from it. Ethan, she said softly, if I stay, if we fight this, it's going to get complicated. Life's already complicated. He squeezed her hand gently. Question is whether we face it together or separately. Before Rose could answer, one of the hands came running up from the barn, his face flushed with exertion. Boss, you better come quick. Someone's been messing with the fence line on the eastern pasture, cut clean through in 3 places. Ethan's expression hardened. Show me. He released Rose's hand and stood, but before following his hand, he turned back to her. Stay in the house. Lock the doors. If anyone comes besides me or one of the boys, you take the rifle from above the mantel and you don't hesitate to use it. Understand? Rose nodded, fear rising again in her throat. Be careful. Always am. She watched him stride away, his shoulders set with determination and purpose, and felt the weight of what was happening settle around her. The men looking for her weren't going to give up. They'd found her once. They'd find her again. And now Ethan and his ranch hands were in danger because of her presence here. The smart thing would be to leave, to disappear into the night and let Ethan's life return to normal. But as Rose went inside and locked the doors as he'd instructed, she realized she didn't want to run anymore. She was tired of being afraid, tired of letting men with money and guns dictate her life. And more than that, she'd found something here in these 2 short weeks that felt like it might be worth fighting for. The afternoon stretched long and tense. Rose tried to keep busy with her normal work, but her ears were always straining for sounds of trouble. When Ethan finally returned as the sun was setting, his expression was grim. "It was a warning," he said, accepting the coffee she poured for him. "Professional job, meant to let me know they can get to my property whenever they want. They're trying to scare me into giving you up." "It's working," Rose said quietly. "I'm terrified. Being scared's not the same as giving in." Ethan set down his coffee and looked at her directly. "Rose, I need to know what you want to do. If you want to keep running, I'll help you. Give you money, supplies, a horse. Help you get somewhere they won't look. But if you want to stay and fight this, I'm with you on that too. Your choice." Rose thought about all the times she'd run before, all the times she'd let fear dictate her choices. She thought about the life she'd been living, always looking over her shoulder, never putting down roots, never allowing herself to want anything because wanting things meant they could be taken away. She thought about this ranch, this solid house, this man who was offering her something she'd almost forgotten existed, the possibility of a future. "I want to stay," she said. "If you'll have me." Something that might have been relief crossed Ethan's face. "Then we'll need to be smart about this. I'm going into town tomorrow to talk to the judge, make sure he knows what's happening. Judge Wardell's a good man, doesn't take kindly to outsiders trying to intimidate his citizens. If we can get him on our side, it'll help. What can I do? Stay safe. That's the most important thing." He paused, then added softly, "And maybe start thinking of this place as home instead of just a job." That night, Rose lay awake listening to the sounds of the ranch, but for the first time since arriving in Texas, she wasn't planning her next escape. Instead, she was thinking about what Ethan had said, about choosing to run towards something instead of just away from something. She was thinking about the way his hand had felt holding hers, steady and warm and sure. She was thinking about the possibility of a life built on truth instead of lies, on standing ground instead of constant flight. She was thinking, for the first time in years, about hope. The next morning, Ethan left for town before dawn, taking 2 of his hands with him. The remaining 4 stayed close to the house, working on repairs that needed doing but never straying far. Rose went about her usual tasks, but the atmosphere was tense, everyone waiting for the other shoe to drop. It came just after noon. Rose was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard horses, more than she could count, coming fast. She ran to the window and felt her heart drop. At least a dozen men, all armed, led by the sheriff from the day before. The ranch hands gathered near the barn, their hands near their weapons but not drawing them. Rose knew they were outnumbered and outgunned. If this came to violence, Ethan's men wouldn't stand a chance. She made a decision in that instant, one born of desperation and a strange new courage she hadn't known she possessed. She walked out onto the porch, her head high, her hands steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I'm Rose Ferguson," she called out. "I'm the one you're looking for. Let these men be. They've done nothing wrong." The sheriff dismounted, and behind him, 3 men in expensive suits did the same. Rose recognized the type immediately. Hired enforcers dressed up to look respectable, men who did dirty work for people who wanted to keep their own hands clean. "Miss Ferguson, these gentlemen have some questions for you about the events in St. Louis." "I'm sure they do." Rose descended the porch steps, forcing herself to walk steadily. "But I'm not going anywhere with them. I witnessed a murder, but I'm not a criminal." "If they have questions, they can ask them here in front of witnesses." One of the suited men stepped forward, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Now, Miss Ferguson, let's be reasonable. We just want to have a conversation about what you saw that night. Come with us quietly, and nobody needs to get hurt." "The way Marcus Thornley didn't get hurt," Rose shot back. "The way I wouldn't have gotten hurt if I hadn't run fast enough. I'm not stupid. You don't want to ask me questions. You want to make sure I never answer any." "You're being dramatic, my dear." "Am I? Then why did you follow me all the way to Texas? Why bring 12 armed men to intimidate a single woman?" Rose's voice rose. "If your employers just wanted to know what I saw, they could have asked me in St. Louis. Instead, they tried to kill me, and when that failed, they sent you." "Sheriff," the man said, his tone hardening, "are you going to let this woman make wild accusations, or are you going to do your job?" The sheriff looked uncomfortable, his gaze moving between Rose and the suited men. "Miss, if you just cooperate, if she'd just disappear, you mean?" The new voice came from behind the assembled riders, and Rose felt a surge of hope so strong it nearly knocked her down. Ethan rode in flanked by his 2 hands, but behind them came 4 more riders. As they drew closer, Rose could see that one wore a judge's formal coat, another had a marshal's badge, and the other 2 were armed men who had the look of professional lawmen. "Judge Wardell," the sheriff said, suddenly sounding much less certain. "Sir, you were just about to make a serious mistake, Coleman." The judge was a silver-haired man with fierce eyes and a voice that carried authority. "Mr. Norwood came to see me this morning with some interesting information about men from out of state harassing a witness to a crime, trying to silence her on behalf of people who should be facing justice themselves. Your Honor, these gentlemen have every right to. They have no rights here." The judge dismounted with surprising agility for his age. "Miss Ferguson is a witness, not a criminal. If the authorities in Missouri want her testimony, they can request it through proper legal channels, not send hired guns to intimidate her into silence or worse." One of the suited men stepped forward, his hand moving toward his coat. "Judge, I think you're misunderstanding the situation." "Don't." The marshal's voice was quiet but deadly serious, his hand resting on his gun. "Don't even think about reaching for whatever you've got in that coat. You're in Texas now, and we don't take kindly to threats against our people." The tension stretched tight, and for a moment Rose thought violence was inevitable. Then the suited man slowly raised his hands away from his coat. "This isn't over." "Oh, I think it is," the judge said. "Because I'm going to send a telegram to my counterpart in Missouri, detailing everything that's happened here. About how Marcus Thornley's employers sent men to silence a witness rather than face investigation. About how they've tracked a woman across state lines to intimidate her. I imagine the authorities in Missouri will be very interested in why certain people are so desperate to keep Miss Ferguson from testifying." "You can't protect her forever," the suited man said, his eyes on Rose. "I don't need to protect her forever. Just long enough for justice to catch up with your employers." The judge's smile was sharp. "And in Texas, we're real good at protecting our own for exactly as long as it takes." The standoff broke slowly, with the suited men remounting their horses with obvious reluctance. The sheriff looked torn between relief and embarrassment, but he followed their lead. Within minutes, the group was riding away, leaving only dust and tension in their wake. Rose felt her knees start to buckle, and suddenly, Ethan was there, his arm around her waist, holding her up. "I've got you," he murmured. "You're safe now." The judge approached, his expression softening as he looked at Rose. "Miss Ferguson, I've sent telegrams to colleagues in Missouri asking about the Thornley case. From what I understand, there's been an investigation building for months into corruption at several gambling establishments, including the one where you worked. Your testimony could be valuable, but it needs to be given properly, with legal protection." "I'll tell them everything I know," Rose said, finding her voice again. "But I won't go back there, I can't. You won't have to. We can arrange for your testimony to be taken here with proper witness protection. It'll take some time to set up, but those men won't be back. They know now that you're under official protection," the judge smiled. "Besides, something tells me Mr. Norwood here would have something to say about anyone trying to harm you." Ethan's arm tightened slightly around Rose's waist. "That's a fact, sir." After the judge and marshal left, Rose and Ethan stood together on the porch, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The adrenaline was draining away, leaving Rose feeling exhausted and oddly empty. "You came back," she said softly. "You brought help." "Of course I did. I told you I'd protect you." Ethan turned to face her, his hands coming up to rest gently on her shoulders. "Rose, when I saw those men here, when I thought about what they might do to you, I realized something. I've been lying to myself about what you mean to me." Rose's heart started beating faster for an entirely different reason than fear. "Ethan, I know it's only been 2 weeks. I know the circumstances are complicated. But somewhere between your first breakfast and watching you stand up to those men today, I stopped thinking of you as just my housekeeper." His thumbs traced small circles on her shoulders. "You're brave and strong, and you make me want to be a better man. You make this ranch feel like the home I've been trying to build for 5 years. And the thought of you leaving, of you not being here, it's worse than any threat those men could make." Tears were sliding down Rose's cheeks again, but these were different from the ones she'd cried before. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to stop running long enough to build something real." "Then learn with me. Stay here, not because you're hiding or because you have nowhere else to go, but because you want to, because you see a future worth having." He hesitated, then added quietly, "Because maybe you feel the same way about me that I'm starting to feel about you." Rose thought about all the lies she'd told, all the names she'd used, all the times she'd pretended to be someone she wasn't. But standing here with Ethan, with his hands warm on her shoulders and his eyes holding nothing but honesty, she couldn't bring herself to hide anymore. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm scared of caring about something this much because everything I've ever cared about has been taken away. I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen. Life doesn't work that way." Ethan's expression was gentle but serious. "But I can promise that whatever comes, we'll face it together. You won't have to run alone anymore, Rose. You won't have to pretend to be someone you're not. You can just be you, and that's enough. More than enough." Rose reached up and placed her hands over his, feeling the strength and steadiness in him. "I don't even know who I am anymore. I've been Rose and Ruth and a dozen other names. I've been a singer and a servant and a woman always looking over her shoulder. Then figure it out from here. Become whoever you want to be." Ethan smiled. "Though I'm partial to Rose, it suits you," she laughed, the sound surprising her with its lightness. "I want to stay. I want to try. But Ethan, I'm broken in ways you might not understand. I've done things, seen things. We all have our scars, Rose. Mine just don't show as much as yours." He pulled her closer until they were almost embracing. "Let me help carry yours for a while. Let me show you what it's like to not have to be strong all the time." The kiss, when it came, was gentle and sweet, a question more than a demand. Rose leaned into him, letting herself feel something other than fear for the first time in weeks. His arms came around her, solid and safe, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "This is crazy," she murmured. "2 weeks ago, I didn't know you existed. 2 weeks ago, I was a man with a ranch and no real reason to come home at night." Ethan pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Funny how fast things can change. They stood like that as the sky darkened and stars began to emerge, holding onto each other while the ranch settled into its evening rhythms. The hands moved around in the distance, tending to final chores, their voices carrying softly on the night air. Somewhere a coyote called and another answered. Over the following weeks, Rose and Ethan's relationship deepened in the way of people who'd faced danger together and come through it intact. The legal proceedings took time, with lawyers and officials making the journey from Missouri to Texas to take Rose's statement. The judge was true to his word about protection, and the investigation into Marcus Thornley's murder and the larger corruption it revealed made headlines even in Texas newspapers. Rose testified truthfully about everything she'd seen and heard, and with her testimony combined with evidence others had gathered, several prominent men in St. Louis were arrested and charged. The men who'd come looking for her in Bandera disappeared back east, their power broken by the exposure of their employer's crimes. Through it all, Ethan was beside her, steady as stone. He sat with her during her testimony, held her hand through the nightmares that sometimes woke her in the dark hours of morning, and showed her every day through actions and words that she was valued, treasured, safe. Rose bloomed under that attention like a flower that had been too long without water. She threw herself into making the ranch house a true home, learning from Margaret how to make better biscuits, planting flowers around the porch, organizing Ethan's chaotic office until he could actually find his ledgers when he needed them. The hands adored her cooking and her no-nonsense way of handling their occasional foolishness. The ranch prospered under her domestic management in ways that surprised even Ethan. But more than the practical aspects, Rose found herself changing in deeper ways. She laughed more easily. She sang while she worked, not the sultry saloon songs of her past, but simple melodies that reflected genuine happiness. She looked forward to the evenings on the porch with Ethan, to the conversations that ranged from cattle prices to books they'd read to dreams they'd never admitted to anyone else. 6 months after she'd arrived in Bandera, Ethan proposed to her properly, with a ring he'd had made in San Antonio, and a speech he'd clearly rehearsed, but which still came out charmingly nervous. They were on the porch, their usual spot, watching the sun set over the hills. "Rose Ferguson, you came into my life running from your past, and somehow you gave me a future I didn't know I wanted." He pulled out the ring box with hands that trembled slightly. "I know we've only known each other half a year, but I knew after 2 weeks that you were different, that you were special. I love you. I love your strength and your courage and the way you hum while you're cooking. I love how you've made this place a home and made me a better man. Will you marry me? Will you stay here not as my housekeeper but as my wife?" Rose looked at the ring, simple gold with a small diamond, and then at Ethan's face, open and hopeful and showing all his heart. 6 months ago, she would have been too afraid to say yes, too convinced that happiness was temporary and would be ripped away. But 6 months of being loved had taught her that some things were worth the risk. "Yes," she said, and watched joy break across his face like sunrise. "Yes, I'll marry you, Ethan Norwood. I'll build a life with you here. I'll stop running and start living." He slipped the ring on her finger and it fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. Like she'd been made for this moment, this man, this life. When he kissed her, it was with the passion of someone who'd held back for months out of respect and caution, and Rose kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring into it all the love and gratitude and hope she'd been afraid to feel. They were married in early spring of 1883 in the small church in Bandera with the whole town in attendance. Margaret cried and insisted on making the wedding cake herself. The judge gave the bride away, having become something of a protective figure in Rose's life. Ethan's ranch hands served as groomsmen, scrubbed clean and uncomfortable in their Sunday best. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up could probably be heard all the way to San Antonio. The wedding night was tender and sweet, with Ethan showing Rose what it meant to be loved by a good man, to have someone see her as precious and worthy of care. She'd known men before, in ways that had left her feeling hollow and used, but with Ethan, everything was different. He made her feel cherished. He made her feel beautiful. He made her feel like she deserved happiness. Afterward, lying in his arms in the bed they would now share every night, Rose felt the last piece of armor she'd been wearing finally fall away. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I never thought I'd be able to say that to anyone and mean it, but I do. I love you so much it terrifies me. Don't be terrified." Ethan's arms tightened around her. "Be happy instead. We've earned it." Life settled into a new rhythm after that, one marked by partnership and growing love. Rose was no longer just managing the household. She was building a life. She and Ethan worked together on plans to expand the ranch, to increase the herd, to improve their breeding stock. She had opinions on the cattle business and wasn't shy about sharing them. And Ethan discovered that she had a head for numbers and strategy that proved invaluable. In the fall of 1883, Rose realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with equal parts joy and terror, the old fears rising up to whisper that she couldn't possibly deserve this, that it would somehow be taken away. But Ethan was overjoyed, and his happiness helped quiet her fears. "A baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We're going to have a baby. Are you hoping for a boy or a girl?" Rose asked, her hands resting on her still flat stomach. "I'm hoping for healthy. Everything else is just details." He knelt beside her chair and pressed a kiss to her temple. "But I'll admit, I've been thinking about teaching a son to ride, or watching a daughter wrap me around her little finger the way her mother has." "I haven't wrapped you around anything," Rose protested, laughing. "You absolutely have, and I wouldn't have it any other way." The pregnancy was difficult at times, with Rose suffering from sickness that lasted well past the first few months and exhaustion that left her frustrated at her own limitations. But Ethan hired a woman from town to help with the heavier housework, and the ranch hands stepped up without being asked, taking on extra tasks so Rose could rest when she needed to. In May of 1884, their son was born after a labor that lasted through the night and into the next afternoon. Ethan paced the porch like a caged animal while Margaret and the doctor attended to Rose, and when he finally heard the baby's cry, he nearly collapsed with relief. They named him Thomas, after Ethan's father, and he was perfect in the way that all new parents believe their children to be perfect. Rose held him and felt something click into place inside her, some piece of herself she hadn't known was missing. This was her family, her son, her future. Everything she'd run toward had led to this moment. "He's so small," Ethan said, his finger carefully tracing the baby's tiny hand. "I'm terrified I'm going to break him." "You won't." Rose smiled up at her husband, seeing the love and fear and joy warring in his expression. "You're going to be a wonderful father. I want to give him everything, safety and love and a good life." Ethan's voice was thick with emotion. "I want him to never doubt that he's wanted, that he belongs somewhere." Rose understood what he was really saying, that he wanted for their son everything that both of them had lacked at various points in their lives. "Then we'll give him that, together." The years that followed, were the happiest of Rose's life. Thomas grew from infant to toddler to a sturdy little boy who followed his father around the ranch with worshipful eyes. In 1886, they had a daughter they named Sarah, who proved to have her mother's auburn hair and her father's quiet determination. The ranch prospered, growing to over 1,000 head of cattle, becoming one of the most successful operations in Bandera County. Rose grew into her role as rancher's wife and mother, becoming a respected figure in the community. She joined the Church Ladies' Society, helped start a school in town, and became known for her generosity to newcomers and those in need. When people asked about her past, she was honest in the ways that mattered. She'd come from Missouri, had survived hard times, had found a new life in Texas. The details she omitted no longer felt like lies so much as private history, things that belonged to a different woman in a different life. Margaret became her closest friend, the grandmother figure Rose's children called Aunt Maggie. Judge Wardell remained a family friend, dining with them regularly and dispensing wisdom along with his opinions on politics and cattle. The ranch hands who'd been there when Rose first arrived became fixtures in their lives, uncles of a sort to the children, loyal to the Norwood family in ways that went beyond employment. On a warm evening in June of 1889, 7 years after Rose had first arrived in Bandera, she and Ethan sat on their porch watching the sunset. Thomas was playing in the yard with Sarah toddling after him, their laughter carrying on the evening air. The ranch spread out around them, prosperous and peaceful, home to not just cattle but to the life they'd built together. "You ever think about St. Louis?" Ethan asked, his hand finding hers as it always did in these quiet moments. Rose considered the question. "Sometimes. Not with fear anymore, just with curiosity, I suppose. Wondering what became of people I knew, places I worked. But it feels like something that happened to someone else, like a story I read once rather than something I lived. You're not that woman anymore." "No, I'm not." Rose smiled. That woman was so scared all the time. She didn't know how to trust or hope or believe in anything lasting. Sometimes I'm grateful to her, though, for having the courage to run when she needed to, for surviving long enough to find her way here. I'm grateful to her, too. Ethan lifted their joined hands and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "Because she led me to you." "To us," Rose corrected, gesturing to their children, their land, the home they'd made. "We built this together, Ethan. You gave me a future when all I could see was my past. You taught me what it meant to be loved without conditions, to be valued for who I am rather than what I can do or what I've survived. You made me believe in second chances. You gave me a family when I thought I'd spend my life alone. You made this ranch a home instead of just a business. You gave me love I didn't know I was missing." Ethan pulled her close, and Rose leaned into him, breathing in the familiar scent of him, feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers. "Best decision I ever made was offering you that job. Best decision I ever made was accepting it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play and the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. In the distance, cattle lowed and horses whickered. The creek burbled its eternal song. A bird called good night to the fading day. Rose thought about the journey that had brought her here, about the fear and pain and desperate flight that had led her to Bandera, to this ranch, to this man. She thought about the woman she'd been, always looking over her shoulder, always preparing to run. And she thought about the woman she'd become, the one who'd learned to stand still, to plant roots, to believe in tomorrow. In December of 1890, Rose gave birth to their third child, another son they named James. He was a loud, lusty baby who seemed determined to make his presence known, and he fit into their family as if he'd always been meant to be there. Thomas, now 6, was fascinated by his new brother, and Sarah, at 4, wanted to help with everything from diaper changes to lullabies. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Ethan became a respected voice in the local cattlemen's association, and his operation was held up as an example of how to run a successful ranch through intelligence and hard work rather than just luck and land. Rose's domestic management, her careful attention to finances, and her way of making everyone who worked for them feel valued all contributed to their success. In 1892, when Rose was 33 years old, a letter arrived from Missouri. She stood in the kitchen holding it, her heart beating fast, recognizing the official seal of the St. Louis court system. For a moment, the old fear rose up, the instinct to run or hide or prepare for disaster. But then Ethan walked in from the barn, and she handed him the letter. "It's from St. Louis. Will you open it?" "I don't think I can," he did, scanning the contents quickly before a smile broke across his face. "It's over, Rose. The last of the men involved in the Thornley case have been convicted and sentenced. The prosecutor wanted you to know that your testimony was crucial to bringing them to justice. He says you can consider the matter completely closed, that you're free from any further legal proceedings, and that the men who threatened you are either in prison or dead." Rose felt something she'd been carrying for a decade finally release its grip on her heart. "It's really over. It's really over." Ethan set the letter aside and pulled her into his arms. "You're safe. Completely, absolutely safe. No more looking over your shoulder. No more wondering if the past will catch up with you. It's done." She cried then, great shaking sobs of relief and release, and Ethan held her through it, his steady presence anchoring her as it always had. When the tears finally subsided, Rose felt lighter than she had in years, as if she'd been carrying a weight she hadn't fully acknowledged until it was lifted. "I'm free," she whispered. "Really, truly free." "You've been free since the day you chose to stop running," Ethan said gently. "But I'm glad you can feel it now." That Christmas was particularly special, with the house full of laughter and love, with their 3 children filling the rooms with noise and energy, with friends joining them for a celebration that lasted well into the evening. Rose looked around her table at the life she'd built, at the family she'd created, and felt such profound gratitude it nearly overwhelmed her. Margaret caught her eye and raised her glass in a silent toast, and Rose understood the message. You did it. You survived, and more than that, you thrived. The years continued to unfold in the gentle rhythm of ranch life, marked by seasons and growth, and the steady deepening of love between Rose and Ethan. Their children grew, each developing their own personality and passions. Thomas showed an early aptitude for the cattle business, following his father's footsteps with eager determination. Sarah proved to be artistic and bookish, always drawing or reading or making up elaborate stories. James was the adventurous one, constantly getting into mischief and charming his way out of consequences. In 1895, Rose and Ethan celebrated their 12th wedding anniversary with a trip to San Antonio, their first time away from the ranch and children for more than a day since Thomas had been born. They stayed in a hotel, ate in fancy restaurants, and walked through the city streets like a young courting couple rather than a married couple with 3 children and a ranch to run. On their last evening, sitting in the hotel restaurant, Ethan took her hand across the table. "Do you remember when we first met? You were so determined, so desperate to prove yourself capable. I remember thinking you were taking a huge risk hiring someone you knew nothing about." Rose smiled at the memory. "I was certain you'd regret it within a week." "I knew by the end of that first day that I wouldn't regret it. You worked harder than anyone I'd ever employed, and you never complained or asked for special treatment." He paused, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. But more than that, there was something about you, even then. A strength that went bone deep, a determination to survive. I respected that even before I loved you. I fell in love with you slowly, Rose admitted. Every day a little more. Every time you showed me kindness without expecting anything in return. Every time you protected me when you had no obligation to. Every time you looked at me like I was valuable rather than disposable. She blinked against sudden tears. You saved my life, Ethan. In every way a person can be saved. We saved each other, I think. I was building a ranch, but I was forgetting to build a life. You reminded me what really matters. He lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. I love you more today than I did on our wedding day, and I'll love you more tomorrow than I do today. That's how it works, I'm discovering. Love that's real just keeps growing. They returned to the ranch renewed, recommitted to each other and to the life they were building together. The cattle business had its ups and downs, with good years and lean years, but the Norwood ranch remained stable through all of it, a testament to smart management and hard work. Rose became involved in efforts to bring more resources to Bandera, helping establish a proper library and advocating for better schools. She taught Sunday school at the church, mentored young women who found themselves in difficult circumstances, and became known throughout the county as someone who could be counted on for help and sound advice. In 1897, Thomas turned 13 and began taking on more responsibility around the ranch, working alongside the hands and learning the business from the ground up. Sarah, at 11, had become an accomplished artist whose drawings decorated the walls of their home and who'd begun teaching art to younger children in town. James, at 7, was still more interested in adventures and mischief, but he had a kind heart and a way with animals that suggested he'd find his place eventually. That fall, Ethan's health took a frightening turn when he collapsed while working cattle. The doctor diagnosed exhaustion and stress, prescribing rest that Ethan was terrible at taking. Rose put her foot down, taking over more of the ranch management herself and refusing to let Ethan work the long hours he was accustomed to. "I'm not an invalid," he protested from his enforced bed rest. "No, but you will be if you don't listen to the doctor and to me." Rose sat beside him, her expression firm but loving. "Ethan, we've built something good here. Don't throw it away by working yourself to death. The ranch will survive if you take time to heal. We need you alive more than we need a few extra head of cattle." He recovered, but the scare changed something in both of them. They began to talk more seriously about the future, about what would happen to the ranch, about their children's roles in it. Thomas was eager to take on more responsibility, and by the time he was 16, he was essentially managing the day-to-day operations under Ethan's guidance. This freed Ethan and Rose to focus more on each other, to take evening rides together, to sit on their porch and talk for hours the way they had when they were newly married. They traveled more, taking the children to see different parts of Texas, exposing them to opportunities and experiences beyond the ranch. In 1900, as the new century dawned, Rose stood on the porch of the house that had been her home for 18 years and marveled at how much had changed. She was 41 years old, mother to 3 nearly grown children, wife to a man she loved more deeply than she'd ever imagined possible. The ranch had grown to nearly 2,000 acres, one of the largest and most successful in the region. But more than the physical success, Rose had built something she'd never had before, a real life. She had friends who knew her history and accepted her anyway. She had a reputation as a capable, generous woman rather than a desperate runaway. She had children who would never know the fear and uncertainty that had marked her early years. She had a husband who loved her not despite her past, but including it, seeing her whole and valuing every piece of her. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Everything. Nothing. Just how strange and wonderful life is." Rose leaned back against him. 18 years ago, I stepped off a stage in Bandera with $6 and no plan beyond surviving another day. Now look at this. "Now look at us," Ethan corrected. "You didn't just survive, Rose, you thrived. You built a family and a life and became someone the whole county respects and admires." "We built it," she insisted. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. That's what partnership means, what marriage means." He turned her in his arms so she was facing him. "And I wouldn't want to have built it with anyone else." They kissed there on the porch as the sun set over their land, their children's laughter carrying from inside the house, the ranch settling into evening around them. It was a kiss that held 18 years of love and struggle and triumph, a kiss that promised 18 more years and beyond. As the years continued to pass, Rose and Ethan settled into the comfortable rhythm of a long, happy marriage. Their children grew into adults who made them proud. Thomas married a woman from a neighboring ranch and began building his own herd on land Ethan deeded to him. Sarah went to Austin to study art, eventually becoming a teacher and marrying a professor. James, surprising everyone, became a veterinarian, bringing his love of animals and his adventurous spirit together into a career that suited him perfectly. By 1905, Rose and Ethan were grandparents 3 times over, with Thomas and his wife producing 2 daughters and Sarah having a son. The house that had once seemed so quiet when Rose first arrived was now regularly filled with the sounds of grandchildren playing, multiple generations gathering for Sunday dinners and holidays. Rose, now 46, had silver threading through her auburn hair and lines around her eyes from years of laughter and sun. But she was healthy and happy, content in ways she'd never dreamed possible during those dark years in St. Louis. She still managed the household, still kept the ranch accounts, still provided the domestic foundation that allowed everything else to function smoothly. Ethan, at 53, had slowed down some, content to let Thomas handle more of the physical work while he focused on breeding decisions and business strategy. But he was still strong, still vital, still the man Rose had fallen in love with all those years ago. On a June evening in 1907, 25 years to the day after Rose had first arrived in Bandera, Ethan arranged a surprise for her. He took her to the spot where the house stood, where she'd first seen their future home, and wondered if she'd found a place to stop running. "I wanted to mark the anniversary," he said, producing a small velvet box. 25 years since the day you walked into that cafe and changed my life." Inside the box was a locket on a delicate gold chain. When Rose opened it, she found 2 photographs, one of them on their wedding day, young and full of hope, and one recent, showing them surrounded by their children and grandchildren. "This is beautiful," Rose whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It's our story," Ethan said softly. "The woman who was escaping her past, and the rancher who offered her a future. Except it turned out to be our future, built together, better than anything either of us could have imagined alone." Rose fastened the locket around her neck, where it would stay for the rest of her life, a reminder of where she'd come from and what she'd become. "Thank you," she said, the words encompassing so much more than the locket. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible, for protecting me when I was vulnerable, for loving me when I didn't know how to love myself. Thank you for giving me a home and a family and a life worth living." "Thank you for choosing to stay," Ethan replied, "for being brave enough to stop running and build something lasting. Thank you for making me a husband and a father, and teaching me what love really means. Thank you for every day of these 25 years, and for all the days still to come." They stood together watching the sunset over the ranch they'd built, the land they'd worked, the legacy they were leaving to their children. In the distance, they could see Thomas riding in from checking the herds, could hear Sarah's voice calling her son to wash up for supper, could see James's buggy approaching for his weekly visit. Rose thought about the terrified woman who'd fled St. Louis, covered in another man's blood, who'd traveled across half the country with nothing but fear and determination. She thought about the tentative, desperate woman who'd approached Ethan Norwood in Margaret's cafe, willing to take any chance at survival. She thought about all the versions of herself she'd been over the years. The runaway, the housekeeper, the bride, the mother, the rancher's wife, the grandmother. And she thought about the woman she was now, Rose Norwood, beloved wife of 40 years standing, mother of 3, grandmother of 3 with more surely to come. A woman who'd faced her past and built a future. A woman who'd learned to trust and love and hope. A woman who'd found home not in a place, but in a person, in a family, in a life deliberately chosen rather than desperately fled. "I love you," she said, the words as true now as they'd been the first time she'd spoken them, perhaps truer for having been tested and proven over a quarter-century of shared life. "I love you," Ethan replied, and pulled her close as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. They would have many more years together, watching their grandchildren grow, seeing the ranch continue to prosper under Thomas's capable management, taking joy in Sarah's artistic success, and James's growing reputation as a healer of animals. They would face sorrows too, as all long lives must, but they would face them together, their love a constant through changing times. But on this evening, this anniversary of beginnings, they simply stood together in the place where their story had truly started, grateful for what they'd found, for what they'd built for each other. The woman who'd been escaping her past had found more than shelter with the rancher who'd offered her work. She'd found love and family and purpose. She'd found herself, and the rancher who'd thought he was simply hiring a housekeeper had gained so much more. He'd gained a partner, a lover, a friend, a woman who'd helped him transform a ranch into a home and a business into a legacy. Together, they'd created something neither could have achieved alone. A life worth living, a love worth fighting for, a future worth every risk they'd taken to reach it. As darkness settled over the Texas hills and stars began to emerge in the vast sky above, Rose and Ethan turned and walked hand in hand back to their home, where their family waited and their future, still unfolding, stretched bright before them. The past, with all its pain and fear, had led them here. And here, they'd learned, was exactly where they'd always been meant to be. The end of their story, if such love stories ever truly end, was simply this: two people who found each other when they needed it most, who chose each other every day thereafter, and who built a life together that honored both the difficulties they'd survived and the joy they'd created. Rose had been running when she found Ethan, but what she discovered was worth running toward for the rest of her days.